The gunshot echoed through the canyon just as Hannah Vale rounded the bend with her medicine bag. And she knew before she saw the dust cloud rising that someone was in terrible trouble. It was late October in 1883, and the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the scrubland outside Las Animas, Colorado, where she had been gathering yarrow and sage for her remedies. The sound came from the direction of Bitter Creek, a dried-up waterway where desperate men sometimes hid from the law and decent folk knew better than to wander. But Hannah had never been one to turn away from trouble, especially when it might mean someone needed help. She urged her mare forward carefully, staying low in case more shots rang out. What she found when she crested the rocky outcrop made her heart clench with both fear and pity. A man lay sprawled on his back near a scraggly juniper tree, his hat a few feet away, dark hair matted with sweat. But it was not the man who had taken the bullet. Beside him, a beautiful bay horse lay on its side, flanks heaving, blood seeping from a wound in its shoulder. The man had his hands pressed against the injury, trying desperately to stanch the bleeding, his face contorted with anguish. "Easy now," Hannah called out as she dismounted, keeping her voice steady despite her racing pulse. "I am here to help." The man's head snapped up, and she saw eyes the color of storm clouds, wide with desperation and rimmed with red. He could not have been much older than her own 23 years, maybe 25 or 26, with a strong jaw shadowed by several days of stubble and shoulders broad beneath a dusty work shirt. "Madam, please," he choked out. "He is dying. Those bandits shot him when I would not give them my wages. They were aiming for me, but Ranger threw himself in front. Please, if you know anything about animals." Hannah was already beside the horse, her experienced hands moving over the wound with practiced efficiency. She had learned veterinary skills from her father, who had been the closest thing to a doctor this part of Colorado had before he died 2 years ago. Since then, she had tended to everything from cattle with bloat to dogs with broken legs, and she had saved more animals than she had lost. This horse was strong, she could tell, with good muscle tone and clear eyes despite the pain. The bullet had gone through the fleshy part of the shoulder, missing the bone by what looked like less than an inch. "He has a fighting chance," she said firmly, already pulling supplies from her bag. "But we need to stop this bleeding and get the wound cleaned before infection sets in. What is your name?" "Ryder Finnegan," the man said, his voice shaking. "This is Ranger. He has been with me for 7 years, since he was a colt. Saved my life more than once, and now he took a bullet meant for me. I cannot lose him, madam. I just cannot." The raw emotion in his voice told Hannah everything she needed to know about the bond between this cowboy and his horse. She had seen it before, that deep connection that went beyond ownership into genuine love and partnership. "I am Hannah Vale," she said, threading a needle with steady hands. "And I am going to do everything I can to save him, but I need you to hold him still and keep talking to him. Your voice will calm him better than anything I have." Ryder moved to Ranger's head, kneeling in the dust and cradling the horse's massive head in his lap. He stroked the white blaze that ran down Ranger's nose and murmured words of comfort while Hannah worked. She cleaned the wound with whiskey from Ryder's saddlebag, her movements quick but gentle. The horse whinnied and tried to thrash, but Ryder's presence seemed to anchor him. Hannah could see the trust between them, the way Ranger's eye fixed on his owner even through the pain. The sun was sinking toward the horizon by the time Hannah finished stitching and bandaging the wound. Her back ached from bending over, and her hands were stained with blood, but Ranger's breathing had steadied, and the bleeding had stopped. She sat back on her heels and wiped sweat from her forehead with the back of her wrist. "He needs rest and water, and that wound needs to be cleaned twice a day and the bandages changed. If we can keep infection away, he should heal." Ryder looked up at her with such gratitude that it made her chest tighten. "You saved him," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I do not know how to thank you." "He is not out of danger yet," Hannah cautioned, though she allowed herself a small smile. "Can you get him back to town?" "He should not be walked far, but he cannot stay out here overnight either." "I have a small place about a mile from Las Animas," Ryder said. "Nothing fancy, just a cabin and a lean-to for Ranger, but it is shelter, if you think he can make it that far." Hannah considered. A mile was pushing it for an injured horse, but the alternative was spending the night in the open, and that carried its own dangers. "We will go slowly," she decided. "And I am coming with you. Someone needs to monitor him through the night." She expected Ryder to protest, to say it was not proper for an unmarried woman to spend the night at a bachelor's homestead. But instead, he just nodded gratefully. Perhaps he was too worried about Ranger to care about propriety, or perhaps he understood that Hannah was a healer first and everything else second. Either way, they worked together to get Ranger on his feet, supporting the horse's weight between them as they began the slow journey north. The walk took over an hour, with frequent stops to let Ranger rest. Hannah learned that Ryder had been working as a ranch hand at the Double J spread, saving money to buy his own land. The wages he had been carrying when the bandits attacked represented 4 months of brutal work, and he had hidden the money in his boot heel, which was the only reason he still had it. The bandits had been more interested in his horse and saddle anyway, and when Ryder refused to hand over Ranger, they had opened fire. Most men would have let the horse go, Hannah observed as they paused near a dried creek bed. Ryder's jaw tightened. "Ranger is not most horses. And I am not most men, I suppose. Call it foolish if you want, but there are some things worth fighting for, worth dying for. He has carried me through blizzards and stampedes, crossed rivers and mountains. He is my partner, my friend. I would not sell him for 10 times what those bastards could have given me." The way he said it, with such fierce conviction, made something warm unfurl in Hannah's chest. She had known too many men who saw animals as disposable tools, things to be used and discarded when they wore out. Her own father had been different, teaching her to respect the creatures they tended, and she had always hoped to find a man who shared that view. Not that she was looking, exactly. Most of the eligible men in Las Animas saw her as too educated, too independent, too willing to speak her mind. At 23, she was already being called a spinster by the town gossips. "It is not foolish," she said quietly. "It is admirable." By the time they reached Ryder's property, full dark had fallen and a cold wind had picked up, carrying the promise of an early winter. The cabin was small but well-maintained, with a stone chimney and glass windows that spoke of care and attention. The lean-to beside it was clean and dry, with fresh straw already laid down. Hannah helped settle Ranger in his stall, making sure he had water within easy reach and checking his bandages one more time. "He should rest now," she said, smoothing a hand down Ranger's neck. "But I want to check on him every few hours through the night. Do you have somewhere I can sleep?" Ryder looked uncomfortable for the first time since they had met. "Madam, I only have the one room. I can sleep in the lean-to with Ranger and you can have the cabin. There is a lock on the door and everything." Hannah almost laughed at his obvious distress. "Mr. Finnegan, I have been elbow-deep in your horse's blood for the past several hours. I think we are past standing on ceremony. You need rest too, and sleeping in the cold will not help anyone. I will take the floor by the fire and you can have your bed. I trust you are enough of a gentleman not to make me regret that decision." "Of course," Ryder said quickly. "I would never." "You have my word, madam." "Hannah," she corrected. just Hannah. Inside the cabin, she found a space that was sparse but clean. A bed in one corner, a table with 2 chairs, a stone fireplace, and shelves lined with a few books and supplies. Ryder built up the fire while Hannah washed her hands in a basin, scrubbing away the worst of the blood and dirt. When he offered her coffee and beans, she accepted gratefully, suddenly aware of how hungry she was. They ate in companionable silence at first, both too tired for much conversation. But as the warmth of the fire seeped into her bones and the food restored her energy, Hannah found herself curious about this man who loved his horse enough to risk his life. "Where are you from?" she asked. "You do not sound like Colorado-born." "Missouri originally," Ryder said, wrapping his hands around his tin cup. "My father had a farm outside of St. Joseph, but he lost it after the war. Bad loans and worse luck. I came west when I was 18 looking for work and a fresh start. That was 7 years ago now. I have been saving every penny I can spare, hoping to buy a piece of land and start a small ranch. Nothing grand, just enough to support a family someday if I am lucky enough to find a woman willing to take on a poor cowboy." He said the last part with a self-deprecating smile that Hannah found unexpectedly charming. There was no false pride in him, no pretension, just an honest man working toward an honest dream. "What about you?" he asked. "You obviously have medical training." "That is rare for anyone in these parts, let alone a woman." Hannah cradled her own cup, feeling the familiar ache of loss that always came when she talked about her father. "My father was a doctor in Pennsylvania before we moved out here. My mother died when I was young and he raised me alone. He taught me everything he knew about medicine, both for people and animals. When we came to Las Animas 10 years ago, he was the only doctor for 50 miles. I was his assistant, and then his partner, though most people refused to see a woman physician. After he died, I kept up the practice as best I could, mostly treating animals since the human patients went to the new doctor in town." "Their loss," Ryder said firmly. "You saved Ranger's life tonight. I saw how you worked, how calm and sure you were. That is a gift, Hannah." The way he said her name with such warmth and sincerity made her look up from her coffee. Their eyes met across the firelight, and for a moment, something passed between them, a recognition of kindred spirits, perhaps, or just the beginning of understanding. Then Ranger whinnied from the lean-to, and the moment broke. Hannah set down her cup and stood. "I should check on him." Ryder followed her out into the cold night, holding a lantern high. Ranger was standing now, which was a good sign, though he favored his injured shoulder. Hannah examined the bandages, relieved to see no fresh bleeding, and felt his forehead for signs of fever. His skin was warm but not hot, and his eyes were alert. "He is doing well," she said. "Better than I hoped, honestly. He is a strong one." "Like I said, he is special," Ryder replied, running his hand along Ranger's flank with obvious affection. "When I bought him as a colt, everyone told me I was wasting my money. He was too small, too stubborn, not bred for ranch work. But I saw something in him, that same fire you have in your eyes when you are working. He just needed someone to believe in him." Hannah felt her cheeks warm at the comparison, grateful for the darkness that hid her blush. "We should let him rest," she said. "I will come back in a few hours." Back in the cabin, Ryder insisted on giving her his blankets for a pallet by the fire while he made do with his coat. Hannah protested, but he was adamant, and she was too tired to argue for long. She lay down by the dying embers, listening to Ryder's breathing slow and even out as he fell asleep in his bed across the room. It felt strangely intimate, sharing this space with a man she had only just met, yet she felt no fear or discomfort. There was something inherently trustworthy about Ryder Finnegan, something solid and genuine that put her at ease. She woke twice in the night to check on Ranger, and both times she found Ryder already there, speaking softly to his horse in the lamplight. The second time, near dawn, she stood in the doorway of the lean-to and watched him for a moment before announcing her presence. He was singing under his breath, some old Irish ballad she did not recognize, while he stroked Ranger's neck. It was such a tender scene that it made her throat tight. "How is he?" she asked softly. Ryder turned, and even in the dim light she could see the relief on his face. "No fever. The wound looks clean. I think he is going to make it, Hannah, because of you." She shook her head as she moved closer to examine Ranger herself. "Because of his own strength and will to live. I just gave him a chance." "You saved him," Ryder insisted. "If you had not come along when you did with your skills and your medicines, he would have bled to death in that canyon. You saved him, Hannah." She met his eyes over Ranger's back, and something in his gaze made her bold. "Maybe I saved you too," she said quietly. "You would have done something desperate if he died. I could see it in your face." Ryder was silent for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "You are right. I do not know what I would have done. Ranger has been my only constant in a life full of uncertainty. Losing him would have been like losing the last good thing I had." He paused, then added softly, "Until now." The words hung in the cold air between them, weighted with meaning. Hannah felt her heart begin to race, but before she could respond, Ranger shifted his weight and nudged Ryder's shoulder with his nose, clearly wanting attention. The moment passed, and they both laughed, the tension breaking into something warmer and easier. Over the next week, Hannah came to Ryder's cabin every day to tend to Ranger's wound and monitor his recovery. She brought fresh bandages and salves, and taught Ryder how to clean the injury properly. Each day, Ranger grew stronger, the wound healing with remarkable speed. But even as the horse improved, Hannah found herself reluctant to say goodbye to these daily visits. She looked forward to seeing Ryder's face light up when she arrived, to their conversations over coffee about everything from books to dreams to the challenges of making a life in the harsh Colorado territory. Ryder, for his part, seemed equally reluctant to see her go each evening. He began finding excuses to extend her visits, offering her lunch or asking her opinion on some minor concern about Ranger's progress. He told her stories about his travels, the places he had seen and the people he had met, and listened with genuine interest when she talked about her work or her memories of her father. On the 8th day after the shooting, Hannah declared Ranger well enough that he no longer needed daily monitoring. The wound was healing cleanly, and while he would have a scar, there appeared to be no lasting damage to his mobility. It was good news, the best possible outcome, but as she packed up her medical bag that evening, she felt an unexpected sadness. "I suppose this is goodbye then," Ryder said, walking her to where her mare was tied. "Or at least, until I can properly repay you for what you did." "I will find a way, Hannah, I promise." "You do not owe me anything," Hannah said, even though part of her wished for any excuse to keep seeing him. "I did what any healer would do." "No," Ryder said firmly. "You did more than that. You gave me hope when I had none. You showed me kindness when you had no reason to. That matters, Hannah. You matter." Before she could respond, he took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle as they curled around hers. "May I call on you properly?" he asked. "In town, I mean." The way a man calls on a woman when he wants to court her. Hannah's breath caught. She had hoped, but had not dared to believe that Ryder's feelings matched her own growing attachment. "I would like that," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Very much." The smile that broke across Ryder's face was like sunrise, bright and full of promise. He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles, a gesture so courtly and sweet that it made her feel like a heroine in one of the novels she secretly loved. "Sunday, then. I could pick you up for church, and maybe we could have a picnic afterward if the weather holds." "Sunday," Hannah agreed, and when she rode away into the gathering dusk, she could not stop smiling. Sunday dawned clear and cold, with frost sparkling on the ground like scattered diamonds. Hannah took extra care with her appearance, choosing her best dress, a deep green wool that brought out the color of her eyes, and pinning up her auburn hair in a style that was elegant but not overly fussy. She lived in a small house on the edge of Las Animas, the same house where she and her father had practiced medicine together. It felt too big for her alone, full of echoes and memories, but she had never wanted to leave. It was her last connection to him. When Ryder arrived in a borrowed wagon, cleaned up and wearing a suit that had seen better days but was clearly his best, Hannah felt her heart flutter like a trapped bird. He helped her up to the seat with careful courtesy, and they rode into town together, acutely aware of the curious stares and whispered comments their appearance together provoked. Las Animas was a small town, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business, and Hannah Vale's business had been the subject of much speculation for years. She was too educated to be a proper woman, too independent to be a good wife, or so the gossip said. And Ryder Finnegan, though well-liked for his honest work and quiet manner, was just a cowboy with no property and few prospects. They made an unlikely pair, and the townspeople did not hesitate to say so, though Hannah held her head high and ignored the whispers. The church service seemed to drag on forever, though Reverend Matthews gave the same rambling sermon he always did. Hannah found her attention wandering to Ryder, who sat beside her with his hat in his lap, his shoulder just touching hers. It was a small contact, barely there, but it felt electric, charged with possibility. When they sang the hymns, his voice was a rich baritone that sent shivers down her spine. After the service, they collected the picnic basket Hannah had prepared and drove out to a spot she knew by the Purgatoire River, where cottonwood trees provided shelter from the wind, and the water still ran clear and cold. Ryder spread a blanket and they sat in the autumn sunshine, eating fried chicken and biscuits and talking about everything and nothing. "Tell me about your dream," Hannah said, watching a hawk circle overhead. "The ranch you want to build, what would it look like?" Ryder leaned back on his elbows, his eyes distant with imagining. "Nothing too grand. Maybe 100 acres of good grazing land with a creek running through it, a sturdy house with a big kitchen and windows that let in the light, a barn for Ranger and whatever other horses I acquire. I would raise cattle mainly, but also keep some chickens and maybe a few pigs. And a garden," he added, glancing at her. "A big one with vegetables and flowers. Every home should have flowers." The detail about the flowers made Hannah's chest ache with longing. She had never heard a man talk that way, with such consideration for beauty as well as practicality. "It sounds wonderful," she said honestly. "How close are you to making it happen?" "Closer than I was before those bandits attacked," Ryder admitted. "I have enough saved now for a down payment on a modest piece of land. There is a property about 10 miles north of here that is coming up for sale this spring. The owner is moving back east, and he is willing to make a deal with the right buyer. If I can keep working through the winter and save a bit more, I might be able to make him an offer." 10 miles north," Hannah repeated, her mind working. "That is not so far, close enough to still come to town for supplies and church." "Close enough for a lot of things," Ryder agreed, and the way he looked at her made it clear he was thinking about more than just supplies. They talked until the sun began to sink low, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Ryder told her about his childhood in Missouri, his memories of his mother who had died when he was 12, his difficult relationship with his father who drank too much and dreamed too little. Hannah shared her own stories, the loneliness of being an only child in a strange land, the joy of learning medicine from a father who believed women could be just as capable as men, the grief of losing him and feeling adrift in the world. "You are not adrift," Ryder said firmly, reaching across the blanket to take her hand. "You are anchored, Hannah, to this place, to your work, to who you are. That is a kind of strength most people never find." "Sometimes strength is just another word for loneliness," Hannah said, surprising herself with her honesty. "I love my work, and I would not trade the education my father gave me for anything. But there are nights when the house feels so empty, when I wonder if I made a mistake by being too different, too unwilling to fit into the role people expected of me." "Then they are fools," Ryder said, his storm gray eyes intense. "You are extraordinary, Hannah Vale. Any man would be lucky to share your life, your home, your dreams. I hope you know that." The air between them felt charged, heavy with words unspoken. Hannah knew she should be cautious, should guard her heart until she was certain of his intentions. They had only known each other for a little over a week, but when she looked at Ryder, she saw something she had almost given up hoping to find. A man who understood her, who valued her skills rather than being threatened by them, who looked at her like she was something precious. "I am starting to believe it," she whispered. And when Ryder leaned in slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, she closed the distance between them and kissed him. It was a soft kiss, tentative and sweet, but it felt like a promise, like the beginning of something that could be beautiful. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were smiling, and Ryder rested his forehead against hers for a long moment, just breathing in the same air. "I should court you properly," he said, though he made no move to let go of her hand. "For at least a few months, the way decent people do. But Hannah, I need you to know that my intentions are serious. I am falling in love with you, and I want to build a life with you if you will have me." Hannah's breath caught at the raw honesty in his voice. "I am falling too," she admitted. "And I do not care much about what decent people think proper. I care about what feels right, and this feels right." They stayed by the river until the cold drove them back to the wagon, wrapped in a blanket together, talking about the future with the kind of hope and excitement that only new love can bring. Ryder spoke of the house he wanted to build, and Hannah added her own ideas, imagining a room for her medical practice, a porch where they could sit in the evenings. They talked about Ranger, who would finally have a proper stable instead of just a lean-to, and about other horses they might breed and raise. They talked about children, the number they hoped for, and the values they wanted to teach them. By the time Ryder drove Hannah back to her house, they had built an entire life in words, a dream that felt substantial enough to touch. He walked her to her door, and this time when he kissed her goodnight, it was deeper, more confident, full of promise. "I will see you tomorrow," he said, and it was not a question. "Tomorrow," Hannah agreed, and she stood in her doorway watching until his wagon disappeared into the darkness, her heart so full she thought it might burst. The next months passed in a blur of courtship and work. Ryder continued his job at the Double J Ranch, putting in long hours to add to his savings, but he came to Hannah's house nearly every evening. Sometimes he helped her with her work, holding animals still while she treated them or riding along when she needed to visit a farm outside of town. Other times they simply sat by her fire and talked, or played chess on the board her father had left her, or read aloud from books they both loved. Ranger recovered completely, the bullet wound healing into a star-shaped scar that Ryder said gave him character. Hannah saw them together often, horse and man moving as one unit, and she understood even better the depth of the bond they shared. Ranger seemed to recognize her now, nickering softly when she approached and allowing her to stroke his nose without shying away. As winter settled over Colorado, bringing snow and bitter cold, Hannah and Ryder's relationship deepened. They talked about everything, from politics to philosophy to the practical matters of building a homestead. Ryder proved to be well-read despite his limited formal education, with opinions that were thoughtful and considered. Hannah loved the way his mind worked, the way he could debate with her without ever becoming defensive or dismissive. They also learned to navigate the physical aspects of courtship, stolen kisses that grew more passionate as the weeks went by, careful touches that promised more. Hannah had never been this intimate with a man before, and she found herself constantly surprised by the intensity of her own desire. Ryder was always respectful, always stopping before things went too far, but she could see the restraint it cost him, the way his hands trembled when he pulled away. In late January, Ryder came to her with news. The property he had been hoping for was officially going on the market, and the owner was willing to sell to him for a price he could afford with the savings he had accumulated. "I am going to do it," he said, his eyes bright with excitement and nervousness. "I am going to buy the land and start building. It will take time, maybe a year before the house is finished, but Hannah, this is the beginning. This is our future starting to take shape." "Our future," Hannah repeated, loving the sound of it. "I want to see the land. Will you take me?" They rode out the following Sunday, bundled against the cold. The property was everything Ryder had described and more. 120 acres of rolling grassland with a creek that ran year-round, stands of pine trees providing windbreaks, and a view of the Spanish peaks to the south that took Hannah's breath away. There was an old cabin on the property, falling into ruin but still standing, and Ryder walked her through his plans to build the new house 20 yards away, oriented to catch the morning sun. "We could keep the old cabin as a barn or storage," he said, gesturing with his hands as he described his vision. "And here, this is where I thought the main house could be. 2 stories with a parlor and kitchen downstairs, bedrooms upstairs. And here," he led her to a flat area near the house site, "this could be your medical office. A separate building so your patients would not have to come through our home, but close enough that you would not have far to walk." Hannah felt tears prick her eyes at his thoughtfulness. He had planned for her work, had made space for it in their shared dream. "It is perfect," she said. "All of it is perfect." Ryder pulled her into his arms, and they stood together in the cold wind, looking out over the land that would become their home. "Marry me," he said into her hair. "I know we have not been courting long, and I do not have a ring yet, and the house is not even built. But marry me anyway, Hannah. Say you will be my wife, and we will build this life together, one day at a time." Hannah pulled back just enough to see his face, to read the love and hope and vulnerability in his eyes. "Yes," she said, and then louder with more certainty. "Yes, I will marry you, Ryder Finnegan. I will marry you and build this life with you, and I will love you every day we have together." His kiss was fierce and joyful, and when he spun her around in the snow, both of them laughing, Hannah felt like she could fly. They were going to do this. They were going to make something beautiful out of this harsh land and their combined dreams. They married in March, in a simple ceremony at the Las Animas church with half the town in attendance. Hannah wore a dress she had sewn herself from ivory silk, saved from a bolt her father had bought her years ago for some special occasion. Ryder wore a new suit he had ordered from Denver, dark gray with a brocade vest that brought out the color of his eyes. His hands shook as he slid a simple gold band onto her finger, a ring he had saved for months to buy, and when Reverend Matthews pronounced them husband and wife, The kiss they shared was sweet and full of promise. The townspeople threw them a reception in the church hall, and even those who had gossiped about Hannah's spinsterhood and Ryder's poverty seemed genuinely happy for them. There was food and music, and Ryder danced with his new wife until her feet ached and her face hurt from smiling. When they finally left in the wagon, driving out to Ryder's cabin where they would live until the new house was finished, they were showered with rice and good wishes. That night, in the small cabin where Hannah had first saved Ranger's life, she and Ryder became husband and wife in every sense. It was awkward and sweet and imperfect, as first times always are, but it was also wonderful, a physical expression of the love and trust they had built over the past months. Afterward, lying in Ryder's arms in the narrow bed, Hannah felt a sense of rightness she had never experienced before. This was where she belonged. This was home. Spring brought new challenges and new joys. Ryder began the work of building their house, hiring help from the Double J Ranch on his days off and working alone when he could not afford assistance. Hannah divided her time between her medical practice and the homestead, treating animals in town, and then riding out to help Ryder however she could. She learned to mix mortar and hold boards steady while he hammered, learned the satisfaction of seeing walls rise from nothing through their combined effort. Ranger grazed contentedly in the new pasture, his scar barely visible now beneath his glossy coat. Ryder bought 2 more horses, a mare and a younger gelding, the beginning of the breeding program he hoped to establish. Hannah helped him train them, using the gentle methods her father had taught her, and discovered she had a gift for it. The horses responded to her calm voice and patient hands, and soon she was doing as much of the training as Ryder was. In May, Hannah discovered she was pregnant. She told Ryder one evening as they sat on the porch of the half-finished house, watching the sun set over their land. He was speechless for a moment, and then he let out a whoop of joy that sent birds scattering from the nearby trees. He picked her up and spun her around, then set her down carefully, suddenly worried he had been too rough. "I am not made of glass," Hannah laughed, but she was crying too, overwhelmed with happiness. "We are going to be parents, Ryder, a mother and father." "A family," Ryder said, his voice thick with emotion. He placed his hand on her still flat belly with such tenderness that it made her breath catch. "Our family." They worked even harder after that, driven by the knowledge that they needed to finish the house before the baby came. The whole community seemed to rally around them. Ranchers Ryder had worked for came out to help raise the walls. Women from the church brought food and supplies. Even the doctor in Las Animas, who had initially been dismissive of Hannah's abilities, offered his services for the birth, though Hannah politely insisted she wanted a midwife instead. By late summer, the house was finished enough to live in, though there was still work to be done on the interior. It was beautiful in its simplicity, with large windows that let in the light, a stone fireplace that Hannah knew would keep them warm through the Colorado winters, and a kitchen with a modern cast iron stove that Ryder had bought used in Trinidad. The separate building for Hannah's medical practice was smaller but well equipped, with shelves for her medicines and an examination table Ryder had built himself. They moved in on a hot August day, carrying their few possessions from the cabin to the new house. That night, they christened every room, laughing and loving like newlyweds, even though Hannah's belly was starting to round with the baby. They fell asleep in their own bed, in their own house, on their own land, with Ranger and the other horses safe in the new barn, and Hannah thought she had never been so happy. The baby came in November, 3 days after the first serious snowfall. Labor started in the middle of the night, and Ryder rode through the snow to fetch Mrs. Chen, the Chinese midwife who lived on a homestead 5 miles away. The older woman arrived just as dawn was breaking, calm and competent, and took charge of the situation with practiced ease. Hannah had attended many births, both human and animal, but being the one in labor was entirely different. The pain was staggering, wave after wave that left her gasping and clinging to Ryder's hand. But he never left her side, letting her squeeze his fingers until they were white, murmuring encouragement and love through every contraction. Mrs. Chen worked with quiet efficiency, and when the final push came and Hannah heard the first wail of her child, she collapsed back against the pillows, exhausted and elated. "A boy," Mrs. Chen announced, wrapping the baby in a clean blanket. "A big, healthy boy." Ryder's face was wet with tears as he held his son for the first time, and when he placed the baby in Hannah's arms, she fell in love all over again. The infant had a shock of dark hair like his father and gray eyes that would probably change color, but Hannah thought she could see her own nose and chin in his tiny features. He was perfect, this little person they had created together. "What should we name him?" Ryder asked, stroking the baby's cheek with one gentle finger. Hannah had been thinking about this for months, but she had not shared her idea with Ryder yet. "I thought we could call him James," she said quietly. "After my father, James Finnegan." Ryder's eyes filled with fresh tears and he kissed her forehead. "James Finnegan, it is perfect. Your father would be so proud of you, Hannah. Proud of what you have become, what you have built." "What we have built," Hannah corrected, looking around at their home, at their son, at the man she loved. "Together." The first year of James's life was exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. Hannah continued her medical practice, though she scaled back her hours and focused mainly on emergencies and animals that were brought to her, rather than making house calls. Ryder worked the land, building up their herd of cattle and horses, and proved to be a devoted father who took to changing diapers and soothing a crying baby with the same calm competence he brought to everything else. Ranger, now 8 years old, seemed to appoint himself guardian of the baby. Whenever Hannah brought James outside, the big bay horse would come to the fence and watch with alert eyes, nickering softly. As James grew and became more mobile, starting to crawl and then walk, Ranger's vigilance only increased. Ryder joked that they had the best nursemaid in Colorado. When James was 2, Hannah discovered she was pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was harder, with more sickness and fatigue, but she was also more experienced, more confident in her body's ability to do what it needed to do. Their daughter was born in the spring, an April day when the wildflowers were starting to bloom across the prairie. They named her Sarah, after Ryder's mother, and she had Hannah's auburn hair and green eyes. With 2 children, the house that had seemed so spacious began to feel crowded. Ryder added on a room and then another, working through the evenings and weekends to give their growing family the space they needed. The ranch was prospering too, enough that he could hire a hand to help with the work, a young man from Las Animas named Tom who proved reliable and hardworking. The years flowed by, marked by the rhythms of ranch life and the milestones of their children. James grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved books as much as horses. Sarah was her father's daughter, fearless and independent, always wanting to help with the animals. When James was 7, they added a 3rd child, another boy they named Daniel, who had Hannah's coloring but his father's personality, easygoing and friendly with everyone he met. Through it all, Hannah and Ryder's love deepened and matured. They had their arguments, as all couples do, usually about money or how to discipline the children. But they learned to communicate, to listen, to find compromises. The passion of their early courtship settled into something richer and more complex. A partnership built on mutual respect and genuine friendship as much as romance. Ranger aged gracefully, and while he was retired from ranch work by the time he turned 15, he remained a beloved member of the family. James learned to ride on Ranger's patient back, and Sarah after him, and Daniel as well. The old horse tolerated the children's clumsy affection with stoic grace, and Ryder visited him every evening, bringing treats and brushing his coat until it gleamed. On a cold December evening in 1895, Ryder found Ranger lying down in his stall, breathing shallowly. He called for Hannah immediately, and she came running from the house, her medical bag in hand. But one look told her what Ryder already knew. Ranger was dying, peacefully and without pain, but dying nonetheless. He was 17 years old, ancient for a horse who had lived such a hard-working life. They stayed with him through the night, Ryder sitting with Ranger's head in his lap, just as he had that day in the canyon 12 years ago when Hannah had saved the horse's life. She sat beside her husband, her hand on his shoulder, sharing his vigil. The children were asleep in the house, unaware that they were about to lose the gentle giant who had guarded them all their lives. As dawn broke, Ranger took one last shuddering breath and was still. Ryder bent over him, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs, and Hannah wrapped her arms around her husband, offering what comfort she could. She understood this grief intimately. Ranger had been so much more than a horse. He had been the reason she and Ryder met, the catalyst for everything they had built together. "You gave him 12 more years," Hannah said softly, stroking Ryder's hair. 12 good years when he should have died that day in the canyon. He had a wonderful life because of you, because of us. "Because of you," Ryder said, his voice rough. "You saved him, Hannah. You gave us that time together. I will never forget what you did that day, how you appeared like an angel when I needed one most." They buried Ranger on a hill overlooking the creek, in a spot where he had loved to graze on summer evenings. The whole family attended the burial, even little Daniel, who was only 5 and did not fully understand what was happening. Ryder carved a headstone from a piece of wood, simple but beautiful, with Ranger's name and the years of his life. Underneath, he added a single line: "He saved me first." In the days after Ranger's death, Hannah worried about Ryder, who seemed to withdraw into himself, spending long hours alone working on projects around the ranch. But slowly, he began to heal, to smile again, to engage with his family. One evening, about a month after they lost Ranger, he came to Hannah in her medical office where she was preparing medicines for the winter. "I have been thinking," he said, sitting on the edge of her examination table, "about what you said that first night when I told you that you saved Ranger. Do you remember?" Hannah set down her mortar and pestle, giving him her full attention. "I said maybe I saved you too." "You did," Ryder said simply. "You saved me in every way a person can be saved. I was so alone before I met you, Hannah. I had my work and my horse, but no real future, no hope for anything more. And then you appeared in that canyon, and you not only saved Ranger's life, but you saved mine too. You gave me a family, a home, a purpose beyond just surviving. You gave me everything." Hannah felt tears prick her eyes. After 16 years of marriage, he could still make her cry with his honesty. "You gave me the same," she said, moving into his arms. "I was drowning in loneliness and grief, pretending to be strong when I felt so lost. You showed me that I did not have to choose between being myself and being loved. You let me be both." They stood together in the fading light, holding each other the way they had that first day by the river, when they were young and everything was still ahead of them. So much had happened since then. So much joy and sorrow, triumph and struggle. But through it all they had each other, and that had made all the difference. The years continued to pass, and the Finnegan Ranch became one of the most respected homesteads in the county. Hannah's reputation as a healer grew, and she began training other women in veterinary medicine, passing on the knowledge her father had given her. Ryder served on the town council and helped organize a cooperative of small ranchers to negotiate better prices for their cattle. Their children grew strong and capable, learning the values of hard work and compassion that their parents modeled every day. James went away to college in Denver when he was 18, determined to become a lawyer and help people the way his mother had helped animals. Sarah showed no interest in leaving the ranch, instead working alongside her father to manage the growing operation. Daniel was still finding his way, interested in everything from astronomy to poetry to horse breeding, but his parents encouraged his curiosity, knowing he would find his path in time. When Hannah turned 50, Ryder threw her a surprise party, inviting people from all over the county to celebrate the woman who had saved so many lives, both human and animal. The house was packed with grateful patients and their owners, with friends and family, with everyone whose life Hannah had touched over the years. There were speeches and toasts, and Hannah found herself overwhelmed by the love in that room, by the evidence of all the good she had managed to do. Late in the evening, when most of the guests had gone home and only family remained, Ryder took Hannah's hand and led her outside to the porch. The stars were brilliant overhead, undimmed by any city lights, and the air was cool and sweet with the scent of prairie grass. They sat in the rocking chairs they had placed there years ago, looking out over the land they had built together. "You ever regret it?" Ryder asked quietly. "Tying your life to a poor cowboy and his injured horse. You could have had so much more if you had married someone with money or status." Hannah turned to look at her husband, at the silver in his hair and the lines around his eyes that came from a lifetime of squinting into the sun. He was still the most handsome man she had ever seen, and she loved him more now than she had on their wedding day, if such a thing was possible. "I have everything I ever wanted," she said firmly. "A home, a family, work that matters. Love that has lasted through everything. How could I possibly regret any of it?" Ryder smiled and lifted her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles the way he had that first day when he asked to court her. "I love you, Hannah Finnegan. I have loved you since the moment you appeared in that canyon like a miracle, and I will love you until the day I die and beyond." "I love you too," Hannah said, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for finding me, for choosing me, for building this beautiful life with me." They sat in comfortable silence, rocking slowly, watching the moon rise over the land they had made home. Inside the house, they could hear their children talking and laughing, Sarah's voice loud and confident, Daniel's more thoughtful and quiet. Soon James would bring his new wife out from Denver for a visit, and there would be grandchildren to spoil and fuss over. The cycle would continue, generations building on what they had started. Hannah thought about that day in the canyon, about the desperation in Ryder's eyes as he held his dying horse, about the blood on her hands, and the hope in her heart that she could make a difference. She had saved Ranger that day, stitching him back together with skill and determination. But in doing so, she had saved Ryder too, and more importantly, she had saved herself. She had found purpose and partnership, had built something lasting out of a chance encounter and a shared love for a brave horse. "Maybe we saved each other," she said softly, and Ryder's hand tightened around hers in wordless agreement. The seasons turned, year after year, and the Finnegan Ranch prospered through good times and bad. There were droughts that tested their resolve and winters that seemed endless, but they weathered every storm together. There were losses too, Friends who died and children who moved away, but also triumphs and celebrations, birthdays and weddings and the arrival of grandchildren. When Ryder turned 60, he began to slow down, his back troubling him from decades of hard physical labor. He handed over more of the ranch operations to Sarah, who had married a good man named Henry and had 3 children of her own. But Ryder still rose early every morning to check on the horses, to walk the land he loved, to sit on the porch with Hannah and watch the sun come up over the mountains. One morning in early spring, when the wildflowers were just beginning to bloom, Ryder and Hannah walked together up the hill where they had buried Ranger so many years ago. The wooden headstone had weathered but still stood, a testament to the horse who had brought them together. They stood there hand in hand, older but still strong, still in love, still grateful for every day they had together. "You remember what I told you that night?" Ryder asked. "When you first saved Ranger." "You said I saved him," Hannah replied, smiling at the memory. "And I said maybe I saved you too." "You did," Ryder said, pulling her close. "You saved me in every way that matters. And you continue to save me every single day just by being here, by choosing to walk through this life beside me." Hannah rested her head against his shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart, marveling at how a single act of compassion could ripple out into decades of love and partnership. "We saved each other," she said. "That is what love does. It saves us from being alone, from giving up, from forgetting that life can be beautiful even when it is hard." They stood there for a long time, 2 people who had found each other by chance and built a life by choice, surrounded by the land they had claimed and the family they had created. When they finally walked back down the hill toward their home, toward the children and grandchildren who waited for them, they moved slowly, savoring every step. Over the following years, Hannah and Ryder settled into the gentler rhythms of older age. They spent their mornings on the porch, their afternoons in the garden or with the grandchildren, their evenings by the fire. Hannah still treated animals when she was needed, though she had trained several younger women who handled most of the work now. Ryder still advised Sarah on ranch matters, but he was content to let the next generation take the lead. They celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary with a party even bigger than Hannah's 50th birthday. All 3 of their children came home, bringing spouses and children and tales of their lives. James was a successful lawyer in Denver, known for taking cases that helped ordinary people fight against powerful interests. Sarah had made the ranch even more prosperous than her parents had dreamed, expanding into horse breeding with great success. Daniel had become a teacher, traveling between small towns in Colorado to bring education to children in remote areas. Each of them spoke at the anniversary celebration, talking about their parents' love and the example they had set. Sarah told the story of how Hannah had saved Ranger and how that single act had led to everything that followed. "My parents taught us that one moment of kindness can change everything," she said, raising her glass. "That love is a choice we make every day, and that the best things in life are worth fighting for." When it was time for Hannah and Ryder to respond, they stood together before their family and friends, hands clasped as always. "We have been blessed beyond measure," Ryder said, his voice still strong despite his years. "We found each other in a moment of crisis, and we built a life on that foundation of helping each other through the hard times. That is what we hope you all remember. That love is not just about the good days. It is about showing up for each other when things are difficult, about being each other's strength when your own runs out. And about saving each other," Hannah added, looking up at her husband with eyes that still sparkled with love. "Over and over again, in big ways and small. That is what we did, what we still do every day. We saved each other and we continue to choose each other, and that has made all the difference." The party continued late into the night, with music and dancing and laughter that echoed across the prairie. Ryder, despite his aching back, danced with Hannah under the stars, the two of them moving together with the ease of 40 years of practice. When they finally collapsed into their chairs, breathless and happy, surrounded by the noise and joy of their extended family, Hannah thought her heart might burst from the fullness of it all. As the years advanced into their 70s, both Hannah and Ryder's health began to decline in earnest. Hannah developed arthritis that made her skilled hands shake, forcing her to finally retire from medical practice completely. Ryder's heart grew weaker, and the doctor in Los Animas warned them that he needed to take things easy. But they faced these challenges as they had faced everything else, with courage and humor and unwavering support for each other. They spent more time sitting together, reading or just watching the world go by. They talked about their life, reminiscing about the early days and marveling at how far they had come. They talked about Ranger often, remembering the horse who had been the catalyst for their love story, and they made sure their grandchildren knew his story too, so that his memory would live on. On a warm June evening in 1923, 40 years almost to the day after Hannah had saved Ranger's life, Ryder suffered a heart attack. Hannah was with him when it happened, sitting beside him on the porch they had built together all those years ago. She held his hand and called for help, but even as Sarah ran for the doctor, Hannah knew it was too late. She was a healer and she recognized death when she saw it approaching. "I love you," Ryder whispered, his gray eyes locked on her face. "Every day with you was a gift, every single day." "I love you too," Hannah said, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you for choosing me, for saving me, for giving me this beautiful life." "You saved me first," Ryder insisted, his voice fading. "That day in the canyon. You saved Ranger and you saved me, and you kept on saving me every day after. I have been so lucky, Hannah. So blessed." "We saved each other," Hannah said one more time, and she held him as his breathing slowed and finally stopped, as the man she had loved for 40 years slipped away from her. The grief was overwhelming, a physical pain that made it hard to breathe, hard to think, hard to imagine going on. But Hannah had her children and grandchildren around her, and they held her up through the darkness of loss. They buried Ryder on the hill next to Ranger, placing a simple headstone that matched the one he had carved for his horse so long ago. Hannah chose the inscription herself. "He saved me first. I saved him back. We saved each other always." In the months after Ryder's death, Hannah struggled to find her footing. The house felt too empty without him, the mornings too quiet without his voice. But she was not alone. Sarah and her family moved into the main house to care for her, and James visited from Denver every month, and Daniel made sure to schedule his teaching circuit to bring him home regularly. They surrounded her with love and support, and slowly, Hannah began to heal. She lived for 5 more years after Ryder's death, and they were not unhappy years. She took joy in her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, told them stories about their grandfather and the horse who had brought them all into being. She walked the land she and Ryder had claimed, remembering the dreams they had dreamed and the life they had built. And every evening at sunset, she climbed the hill to sit beside the graves of the 2 beings she had loved most in the world, talking to them as if they could hear her. And perhaps they could. When Hannah's own time came, on a clear autumn morning in 1928, she was surrounded by family. Her children held her hands and her grandchildren crowded into the room, and she looked at each of them with such love that it seemed to fill the space. "I have had such a wonderful life," she told them, her voice weak but clear. "I loved deeply and was loved in return. I did work that mattered. I made a difference. That is all anyone can hope for. You did so much more than that, Mama, Sarah said, crying. You showed us how to be strong and kind at the same time, how to choose love even when it is hard. You and Papa built something beautiful, and it will last for generations. Hannah smiled, and with her last bit of strength, she told them the story one more time. About a cowboy and his injured horse, about a woman who appeared in a canyon with the skills to help, about a moment of kindness that had rippled out into a lifetime of love. He said I saved them, she whispered. But the truth is we saved each other. Always remember that. Love saves us. Every single time. And then she closed her eyes and let go, peaceful in the knowledge that she had lived fully, loved completely, and left the world better than she found it. They buried her on the hill beside Ryder and Ranger, 3 headstones standing together overlooking the land they had all loved. The ranch continued under Sarah's capable management, and then under her children's care, and the story of Hannah and Ryder and the horse who brought them together was passed down through the generations. Years turned into decades, and the Finnegan Ranch became part of Colorado history, a testament to the enduring power of love and determination. Historians came to interview the descendants, to document the remarkable story of a female veterinarian in the Old West and the cowboy who had loved her. Writers turned their tale into books and articles, celebrating the romance and partnership that had flourished in such a harsh environment. But for the family, it was always simply the story of Grandma Hannah and Grandpa Ryder, 2 people who had found each other by chance and built an empire of love through choice. The 3 graves on the hill were maintained with care, the headstones regularly cleaned, fresh flowers placed there every spring. On the anniversary of Hannah and Ryder's first meeting, the family gathered to remember them, to tell the story again, to make sure it was never forgotten. The children learned about Ranger, about how a wounded horse had been the catalyst for one of the greatest love stories their family had ever known. They learned about Hannah's courage and skill, about Ryder's devotion and hard work, about the way 2 people can save each other through love and commitment. And on warm summer evenings, when the grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren ran through the fields playing, it was said that sometimes you could see the ghost of a bay horse with a white blaze, grazing peacefully on the hillside. Whether it was true or just a romantic story, no one could say. But the legend persisted, as did the love story it represented. The old ranch house still stood, renovated and modernized over the years, but still recognizably the home that Hannah and Ryder had built with their own hands. Inside, photographs lined the walls, capturing moments from their life together. Hannah in her medical coat, holding a newborn calf. Ryder on horseback, his face lit with joy. The 2 of them on their wedding day, young and hopeful and radiantly happy. Their children at various ages, growing up on the land their parents had claimed. And always, somewhere in the background or the foreground, horses, a reminder of the animal that had started it all. The family kept the tradition alive of telling the story to each new generation, of making sure that Hannah and Ryder's legacy was remembered not just for the successful ranch they built, but for the love they shared and the lives they touched. They told how Hannah had appeared in a canyon when Ryder needed her most, how she had saved Ranger's life with her skill and compassion, how Ryder had recognized in that moment that this woman was someone special. They told how Hannah had seen in Ryder a man who valued loyalty and love over money, who could be vulnerable and strong at the same time. They told how a single act of kindness had grown into 40 years of partnership and devotion. The story became more than just family history. It became a reminder of what was possible when two people chose to see the best in each other, to work together toward common goals, to save each other in all the ways that mattered. It became a testament to the enduring power of love in a harsh world, proof that gentleness and strength were not opposites, but complementary qualities that could build something lasting. As the 20th century gave way to the 21st, the Finnegan Ranch remained a working operation, though it had changed and adapted with the times. But the heart of it, the values that Hannah and Ryder had established, remained constant. Hard work, compassion for animals, love of the land, and above all, the belief that we save each other through our choices and our commitment. These principles guided each generation as they made their own marks on the family legacy. And on the hill, overlooking the creek where Ranger had once loved to graze, the three headstones stood as silent witnesses to a love story that had begun with a gunshot in a canyon, and a woman brave enough to stop and help. The inscriptions were simple but profound, telling a story in just a few words. Ranger's stone, he saved me first. Ryder's stone, he saved me first, I saved him back, we saved each other always. And Hannah's stone placed there by her children, she saved him, she saved us all. Together, those three graves represented the foundation of everything the family had become. A love story that started with a wounded horse and a skilled healer, that grew into a marriage of equals, that built a legacy of compassion and hard work and enduring devotion. It was a story worth remembering, worth telling, worth preserving for all the generations yet to come. Because in the end, that is what love does. It saves us from being alone. It gives us purpose and hope. It teaches us that we are stronger together than we ever could be apart. Hannah and Ryder had learned that lesson on a cold October day in 1883, when a bullet meant for a man struck his beloved horse instead, and a woman with healing hands appeared like an answer to a prayer. They had lived that lesson every day of their 40 years together, and their descendants carried that wisdom forward into the future, a gift that would never lose its value or its power. The sun set over the Finnegan Ranch, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, and somewhere on the hillside, in the place where three beloved souls rested, the wind whispered through the grass like a song of love and remembrance. The story was complete, the circle closed, the legacy secure. Hannah and Ryder had saved each other, and in doing so, they had created something that would last forever, a testament to the transforming power of love, the healing grace of compassion, and the simple truth that sometimes, when we reach out to help another, we end up saving ourselves. It was a story written in the land itself, in every fence post Ryder had set, and every flower Hannah had planted, in every horse they had trained and every child they had raised. It was a story that would never truly end, because love, real love, the kind that saves and sustains and transforms, is eternal. And that was the greatest gift Hannah and Ryder gave to the world, proof that even in the harsh landscape of the Old West, even in a time of hardship and struggle, love could flourish and grow and create something beautiful that would last for generations. Their story, which began with a simple act of mercy toward a wounded animal, had become a legend of devotion and partnership, a reminder that we save each other not just once, but over and over again, every day, in countless small ways and occasional grand gestures. That was the true meaning of their lives together, the message they left behind for all who came after. We save each other, always. That is what love means.